This is page 1 of 29-page document submitted to the United States Securities and Exchange Commission on November 5, 2005. It was titled, "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud." The man who wrote it had spent 5 years doing the math. He had calculated in precise detail that Bernard L. Madoff was running the largest financial con in recorded human history. The SEC read it and did nothing. For 3 more years, $65 billion sat on paper statements that were entirely, completely, and deliberately fake. 3 more years of pension funds, Holocaust survivors, cancer research foundations, and retired school teachers wiring their life savings into a black hole in the Lipstick Building on 3rd Avenue, Manhattan, to a man who hadn't executed a single real trade in at least a decade. His name was Bernie Madoff. And for 40 years, he was the most trusted man in American finance. Bernard Lawrence Madoff built his career on the most powerful currency in finance, not money, reputation. In 1960, he started his firm with $5,000 saved from summer jobs as a lifeguard and sprinkler installer. By the 1980s, his broker-dealer operation on the 19th floor of the Lipstick Building was among the largest market makers on Wall Street. He helped build the electronic trading infrastructure that would become NASDAQ. He sat on its board. He chaired it twice. When new investors were being quietly introduced to his separate investment advisory business, always through referrals, always through country clubs and Palm Beach dinner parties, they weren't just handing money to a fund manager. They were handing it to a man who had literally helped build the machinery of modern markets. You didn't ask Bernard Madoff how his strategy worked. That was considered rude, like asking a surgeon to explain his hands. His stated investment approach, the split-strike conversion strategy, was deliberately complex enough to sound credible, but vague enough to be untestable. He claimed to buy large-cap stocks and offset the risk with options contracts timed to perfection. Month after month, year after year, the returns came back, steady, consistent, roughly 10 to 12% every single year, regardless of whether the broader market was crashing or soaring. That should have been the first alarm bell. It wasn't. The 19th floor of 885 3rd Avenue was the public face. Glass walls, Bloomberg terminals, legitimate market-making operations with real employees who had no idea what was happening 2 floors beneath them. The 17th floor was different. It had no windows. Staff who worked there were told to never discuss their work with colleagues upstairs. Visitors were rare. The core team was small, deeply loyal, and in many cases, completely complicit. Frank DePascali had worked for Madoff since 1975. He was the man who ran the operation on the 17th floor. He controlled the account statements. He controlled the IBM AS400 mainframe that printed them. Statements that showed trades that had never taken place on dates that had already passed at prices that were reverse engineered from historical data to make the returns look real. Think about what that actually means. Not a bad investment, not a risky bet, not even an aggressive accounting interpretation. They would wake up in the morning, check what the S&P had done in previous weeks, and then print statements showing they had bought and sold stocks at precisely the right prices, prices they already knew from history, as if they had predicted the market perfectly. every quarter, without fail. The Depository Trust Company, the central hub that clears virtually every securities trade executed in America, had no record of a single one of Madoff's trades, not one. Nobody checked. One client, the Fairfield Greenwich Group, a so-called feeder fund, wired $7.5 billion into Madoff's accounts. $7.5 billion. Their due diligence reports praised his strategy's remarkably consistent returns. Nobody from their compliance team ever called the DTC to verify a single transaction. The money came in, the statements went out, and the 17th floor kept printing. Harry Markopolos was a financial analyst in Boston. He was not famous, he had no TV show, he had no hedge fund. What he had was a legal pad and a calculator, and in the year 2000, his boss asked him to reverse engineer Bernie Madoff's strategy so their firm could replicate it. He sat down to do the math. Within 4 hours, he knew it was impossible. The returns Madoff reported required options market positions so large that they would have been visible to anyone, because the options market itself wasn't big enough to absorb them. A strategy of that scale, executed legitimately, would have consumed the entire options market many times over. He wrote to the SEC in May 2000. They didn't follow up. He wrote again in 2001. Nothing. In 2005, he submitted the 29-page report, the one with the red stamp we showed you at the top. He titled it bluntly, "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud." He listed 29 specific red flags. He gave them the name, the address, the mechanism, the math. Markopolos later told the Senate Banking Committee that he feared for his life during this period. He varied his driving routes. He kept a firearm. He believed that a man with Madoff's connections, with his access to organized crime-adjacent networks and his ties to foreign capital, would not hesitate to protect what he'd built. The SEC assigned a 24-year-old staff attorney to review Markopolos' 2005 submission. She interviewed Madoff once in January 2006. He told her the split strike strategy had recently been phased out. She closed the investigation. Harry Markopolos drove back to Boston and waited.
It was December 10, 2008. The global financial crisis had been burning for months. Lehman Brothers had collapsed in September. Credit markets had seized, and for the first time in decades, Madoff's investors were requesting redemptions, real money, back in their accounts, in volumes he couldn't service. He called his sons, Mark and Andrew, to his penthouse apartment at 133 East 64th Street, and told them he wanted to pay out year-end bonuses early. They pushed back, asked why, asked what was happening, and Bernie Madoff, the man who had shaken hands with presidents, who had chaired NASDAQ, who had hosted fundraisers for charities and synagogues and hospitals, sat down in his own living room and told his sons the truth. He said the investment advisory business was, quote, one big lie. He said he had nothing left. He said he was finished. His sons did not call the police that night. They called their attorney. The following morning, December 11, 2008, at approximately 8:30 a.m., FBI agents Theodore Cacciopi and B.J. Gross knocked on the door of that same penthouse. Madoff opened it himself. Agent Cacciopi asked him, "We're here to find out if there's an innocent explanation." Bernard Madoff looked at them and said, "There is no innocent explanation." He was arrested on the spot. He was 70 years old. The number most people remember is $65 billion. That was the total value sitting on the fake account statements, the paper wealth Madoff had printed into existence on that 17th floor mainframe. The actual cash investors had wired in and lost was approximately $17.5 billion, still the largest fraud in the history of American finance. Elie Wiesel, the Holocaust survivor and Nobel laureate, lost $15.2 million. His Foundation for Humanity, an organization dedicated to fighting intolerance and indifference, lost everything it had with Madoff. He said the experience was like being violated, like being raped. Steven Spielberg's Wunderkinder Foundation, the Jate Foundation, which funded criminal justice reform and shut its doors entirely within days of the arrest. Hospitals, university endowments, hundreds of individual families who had handed over their retirement savings to the most trustworthy name they had ever known. Mark Madoff, Bernie's oldest son, the one who made the call to the FBI, never recovered. He struggled publicly with the guilt, the scrutiny, the belief that the public assumed he had known. On December 11, 2010, exactly 2 years to the day of his father's arrest, Mark Madoff was found dead in his Soho apartment. He was 46 years old. His 2-year-old son was asleep in the next room. Andrew Madoff, the younger son, spent the next several years fighting non-Hodgkin lymphoma. He maintained until his death in September 2014 that he had known nothing. Bernie Madoff pleaded guilty on March 12, 2009 to 11 federal felonies. He was sentenced on June 29, 2009 to 150 years in federal prison. He died inside the Federal Medical Center in Butner, North Carolina on April 14, 2021. He was 82. He died of kidney disease in a federal prison hospital, without the money, without the name, without the 17th floor, without the IBM AS400 printing statements in the dark. Court-appointed trustee Irving Picard spent over a decade hunting down the money through offshore accounts, feeder fund settlements, and the estate of investor Jeffrey Peicower, which alone paid back $7.2 billion. By the mid-2020s, Picard's office had recovered and distributed over $14 billion to victims. That still left billions unaccounted for. That still left people who got nothing. The greatest frauds in history don't begin with lies. They begin with trust. Harry Markopolos told the SEC exactly what was happening, in writing, with mathematics, with names and addresses, and the institution charged with protecting American investors looked the other way for 8 years. The SEC later published a 456-page report admitting it had failed completely. The report named no criminal charges against any SEC employee. Bernie Madoff spent 40 years proving that reputation is armor, that the more exclusive something feels, the less carefully people examine it, that a man who helps build the market can operate invisibly, entirely outside of it. The money is largely gone. The sons are gone. The name is buried. But the 17th floor, the idea of it, the mechanism of it, never really disappeared. It just got a different address.